Last video, lesson planning. So principles of good lesson planning. Have a clear objective of what you want to teach. So this doesn't mean, for instance, just teach can versus can't. This would mean you're specific, and specific is how you are going to teach it. So teach students to verbally use can versus can't correctly. What this does is this helps you structure your activities with that goal in mind. So if you're just saying teach can versus can't, your activities could be all over the place. Are you doing it spoken? Are you doing it written? How are you doing it? So when you make a clear, specific objective, your activities become more clear and more targeted. Do an overview with approximate times. You don't have to stick to these times exactly, but it kind of can help you see about when you should be moving on to the next thing. These will get more accurate as you get to know your kids, and the same activity is going to take different amount of time for different classes. So for instance, if you teach 5th and 6th, something that could take 6th grade 10 minutes might take 5th grade 15, 20 minutes. So it really just depends on the class. You also just can't wait until every student has finished. Sometimes you've got to move on. And so that could mean that you are telling certain kids to do stuff for homework and bring it in the next day. Remember about differentiation. Try to incorporate all skill sets so they don't all learn the same. So you want to be repeating the same concept in different ways. Change up grouping. We mentioned this as well. Some individual work, some small group work, some work as a class, and changing up the groups in between those. So by level, mixed, etc. Flexibility. So this is something that is really hard as a new teacher. A lot of times we have our lesson plan and we want to just stick to it because that's where we're comfortable. If something isn't working, adapt. You don't need to push through a lesson plan that isn't failing. It is frustrating for you and it is frustrating for the kids. So that would be a good idea to always have a backup plan. This will still happen to me sometimes where I have a lesson plan, and even though I know the kids and I've been a teacher for a couple of years now, you go into the classroom and it's either the day or just something it's not working. So rather than me getting frustrated because they don't understand, the kids getting frustrated because they don't understand, you can just pull out plan B and then try it again the next day with a different tactic. So I have on the Google Drive a daily lesson plan sheet. So this is just a lesson plan example for one class. I have both the original if that's something that you want to use, and then I also have an example. So you would come up with an objective or goal for the lesson. Materials, so consider this ahead of time because sometimes you will get into class and you won't have prepared something that you needed. So it can be helpful to have those listed out so you can just check real quick to make sure you have everything. Your classroom routine, so what you do every morning during your first English class of the day. Morning routines can be a great way to pull the kids in and get them ready to learn. So, this could be you do attendance, you do some songs, some short activities, word roll review. With the younger kids, I think up until like 4th grade, I've done days of the week song, months of the year song, the weather, the date, a word of the day, a journal, and a short grammar activity. Your morning routine can take 20 minutes. That's totally fine. As long as you feel like it's productive, and you're getting some review in, it works out well, and then the kids also know what to expect. Then you want to do a warm-up. So having to do with the topic, this can be a game, a conversation, just something brief to get them thinking. And then you want to introduce the concept. So ideally this is with an interactive or memorable presentation. That's not always possible. And then you're going to get into the activity. So have them take notes if necessary, and then do a guided practice and controlled activity. Or if you're on the execution stage of, whatever it is that you're teaching, you can be doing that as well. Then you want to give them feedback on every activity. So this can be having them check answers together, having different groups present, a quick review, and wrap up, and then an end of class routine. So prep for the next teacher, erase the board, have put their notebooks or colors away, things like that. One of the hardest things to do is to reflect on your lesson. So usually you get home from school, you don't want to think about school, and then you have to think about school because you have to plan your lessons for the next day if you haven't already. But it can be really helpful just to take 5-10 minutes and think about what worked well, what didn't, what technique would you use again, what would you change, and then that helps you when you're lesson planning for in the future as well. Don't worry if every kid doesn't meet the objective of a lesson or master a concept. There are ranges of capabilities in each class. So like I mentioned before, not every kid is going to be with you all of the time. That's okay. So there's also, like I said, an example of a lesson plan like this so you can just see. I think the example is just a basic vocabulary introduction, introducing words of the week. So feedback is important. Praise. If the class did a good job and accomplished what they needed to, tell them. Give them praise whenever they can, and again, make it specific. If there are things that they need to do better, you can tell them, but try to keep it positive. Do feedback on every task you do, especially homework. It can be a good idea to collect homework right at the beginning of the day so that kids can't copy it. But they will learn quickly that if you're not checking it, they don't need to do it and they don't need to try. So definitely give feedback on every activity. This doesn't always have to be a grade. It can just be a check mark. So for instance, a lot of times if they're doing work in their notebooks, I go around and check that they've done it, but I don't necessarily give them points. You can collect their English notebooks. Some people every week collect their English notebooks once and go through and check all of the work and give them points. That's fine too. There are a lot of different ways to do feedback. So you can write the answers up on the whiteboard. You can have them come up and write the answers. You can have the kids do peer correction and swap books. It doesn't always need to be you in the front asking for answers, so you can change it up. Like I was saying before with monitoring and confidence. So once you get to know your kids more, you'll find that some of the weaker ones don't really have a lot of confidence. You don't want to call them out too much if you know that they don't know the answer. So then that way, when you're monitoring, you can see when they have the right answer and kind of call on them in that case. And again, praise as much as you can. A lot of them don't get it at home. So lesson planning long term. So the curriculum is broken down into months. What can be helpful is to break that down into weeks, break that down into days, and then break that down into classes. It can kind of help you see the big picture and then break it down into small, manageable parts. Usually, so I think most of the curriculums have 2 units a month. So then you're thinking, okay, each unit is about 2 weeks, and then half a unit in a week, and then you can kind of break it down from there. I have included a week lesson planning sheet in the Google Drive. You can take a look at it and use that if you would like. So try to think about why and in what way they need to know this, and how are you going to teach it to them in that way. The other thing you can do, and I've included an example of this in the Google Drive, that was my actual weekly routine schedule from my first year here, is having a weekly routine. So what this means is that every time you have English, you can just kind of slot in different activities. So I always liked to make sure that I was definitely doing a reading activity, definitely doing a speaking activity, and doing them at these different times. So that way I made sure I was covering my bases. You're going to be doing speaking and listening and reading activities all combined throughout the week, but I like to make sure that I'm having one that is specifically focused on reading, one that is specifically focused on writing, one that is specifically focused on listening, to make sure that you're getting everything in that the kids need. So that can be kind of helpful to have it broken down that way. And then that way, when you're lesson planning, it's not just like, I don't know what to do. I have no idea what to do. You have it right there. You're okay. So a reading activity, and then you have your grammar point, and then you have your vocabulary. So then you pretty much have a reading activity set up for you, and ready to go for the most part. So that can be helpful. Tips to keep in mind: be as organized and prepared as possible. That just goes in general for anything having to do with teaching. The more organized and prepared you are, it's just better. Um, Collect and check homework at the beginning of the day. We don't give a ton of homework because a lot of the kids don't have help at home in English with their homework. So, if you were to give them math, yeah, their parents could help them. In English, they can't really. So when you give homework, try to make it something that they can definitely do independently, because otherwise you will get a lot of parents messaging you. I will get parents messaging me and saying, my kid couldn't do the homework because I didn't know how to do it and I couldn't help them. So try to make sure it's something that the kid can do independently for sure. Have extra activities up your sleeve in case you finish. You will get to the point where you have a bunch of things that you just know you can do with the kids if you need to. Until that point, you can even write stuff down, Simon Says, or different games and things like that are still helping improve their English. But that way, if your lesson ends 20 minutes early, you're not totally screwed. And like I said, even experienced teachers, sometimes their lesson will end 20, 15 minutes early, and then you kind of do have to have a plan B. So that can always be helpful. Getting a routine of what the kids do when they finish early. So I mentioned this, like a turn-in box can be a helpful thing. Try to avoid lecturing too much. So these videos, for instance, would not be an ideal lesson plan because it's just me talking at you. If you do this to your kids, they will not listen. They will just stop listening, which you might have stopped listening by this point. Who knows? So for science, try to do an interactivity twice a week. For English, it can be a good idea to alternate a hands-on activity with lecturing. I would say tops, for the younger kids, the most you can lecture with in a class is maybe 10 minutes, maybe. But even at that, you're going to be wanting to use pictures or PowerPoint or something like that to have visuals with what you're talking about. Because if you don't have visuals, there's just no way. There's no way the kids are going to understand. It can also be really helpful to make games out of the information. The kids love games, and it can really help them learn quicker. And to take physical breaks. So, run around outside run a lap outside real quick, stretch, play a quick game of Simon Says. I've had kids meditate before, so they just sit there and go, and do that as a class, breathing exercises, anything to get them just up out of their seat for 3 minutes before you have them sit back down and keep working. And this is really important for the younger kids because they go crazy when they sit for too long. Feel free to use the outdoor tables for activities. Just make sure the kids don't get too distracted or use it as playtime, and just give a heads up to the other teachers so that if there's if you're doing a messy science activity or an art project or something and you really do need the outdoor tables, just let them know so that way there's not, two people trying to use the table at the same time. Lesson planning for the future. I'm going to say this, I don't do it. Some people do. If you are someone who makes your lesson plans on the computer and has a chart that you fill out, or if you write really detailed lesson plans in a notebook, these can be really helpful to leave for next year's teacher so that they can use them too. My lesson plans are embarrassing and seem sometimes like they're written in another language. If that's how you lesson plan, that's okay. Just the more information we have for next year's teachers, the better. So if you are someone who does that and you want to make your notebook so that you can leave it for next year's teacher, that's awesome. That'd be great. Stations, I've mentioned these a couple times. This can be a great way to do a bunch of different activities and focus on smaller groups, and it can also be a fun treat for Friday afternoons. Okay, so this is the end of teacher training. I'm also going to I've included on the Google Drive cultural differences, which is just a write-up, and it's more just for you personally of some different cultural differences, and also 7 habits of ineffective teachers and 5 habits of, good classroom managers, effective classroom managers. You can take a look at those. They're pretty well written out because I didn't write them. So other than that, if you have questions, I would say hold on to them, and then when we sit down and we debrief and touch base about all of this teacher training, we can go over those questions and kind of get you on the way. I apologize for this being so long. And yeah, I hope some of this was helpful. And if not, sorry I made you watch all this. Okay, thank you.